a long, probably years before it came out. When I was in my middle 20s, I was going through my own recovery after uncovering some really awful trauma from my childhood. And I can remember when I would leave therapy or when I would leave my office and see clients, I remember having this thought over and over saying, I need to write a book about this because there's so many things that are involved with the process of recovery and healing. And I needed and wanted a book that I could read to make myself feel less alone and less crazy. So I was committed. When I'm in the right spot, when I've done the work that I have needed to do, I need to write this book. For me, a lot of the research was about going back and looking at old journals that I had written, going back and reflecting on sessions that I had had with clients dating back to the early 2000s. And then the other thing is there are a few clinicians that I turned to early in my recovery. One of them that stands out, her name is Dr. Christine Courtois, and she wrote about early childhood trauma and how over 50% of people who are abused by a parent or an authority figure as a child will repress and bury the memories because it's so overwhelming, it's devastating, and in order for us to survive and get through the trauma, we need to push things down. So I looked towards her work a lot because there wasn't a lot of people writing about repressed memory when I started uncovering, and I found that to be so helpful and validating. It helped me to know if there's a book, if there's somebody out there that's doing research on this work, it helps me to know it's not just me. I think the biggest issue with trauma is that when people go through difficult experiences, and many of us will go through stuff, it becomes trauma when there's no way to process or talk about what just happened, whether it's something that happened the day before, if it was something that happened in our childhood 10 years ago. So it's not necessarily just the experience itself, whether it's war or sexual assault or even something like a sudden death of a family member. It's about when you don't have a way to begin to heal and to get support and to be able to learn how to understand what happened and how to make sense of that, and then how to continue living and moving forward. That when I hear the word trauma, that's what I think of. I think of experiences that have been left undigested, experiences where we at the time felt stranded, we felt abandoned. Some of us may have felt responsible in some way. If those feelings don't get addressed immediately after the trauma, that's when things like PTSD will then emerge. When people go through stuff and they don't know how to deal with it or they don't know what to do, then people start turning to all these different vices to try and continue to bury and numb the feelings. The problem with trauma is that even when we try to bury it, things are going to trigger it and things are going to remind us of whatever happened. Something as simple as a sound or a smell or even the sight of a person who could look similar to our perpetrator. So I think that what a lot of people end up doing is they end up turning to things like eating disorders, drugs, alcohol, because they're trying to continue to push it down and not have to accept what happened, not want to know what happened, and not want to have to feel the feelings associated with what happened. There's a lot of examples. I think one example that stands out for me is a young woman who I met in her teens who came from a family where there was a lot of dysfunction. There was verbal abuse, there was physical abuse. When I met her, and I'll refer to her as Cassie, she was 17 and had just left a treatment center for eating disorders. And we started doing therapy when she was discharged at 17. And she very gradually started to talk with me about the problems in her family and some of the abuse experiences that she dealt with or witnessed as a young child. But she was also dating someone, and I didn't find out until she was probably 20 or 21 that this person that she was in an intimate relationship was also abusing her physically and sexually. So this was a situation where once she started uncovering, breaking the silence, and talking with me about what was going on with her boyfriend, then she was able to understand that the reason she wasn't talking about the stuff with her boyfriend in therapy was because she had already learned from a young age that she shouldn't talk about things that make her uncomfortable, or she was afraid that if she said something that she would be harmed physically. She felt responsible, she felt guilty. What I noticed is that as soon as she broke her silence, she went through about a good year of real trauma therapy where she was healing from that relationship. She was able to break up with him. She was beginning to understand more about the impact of her childhood. And then I think it was 2 years after she left the abusive relationship that she met a wonderful guy. And she very, very slowly integrated him into her life. She learned how to create safety, how to recognize the difference between someone who's abusive versus someone who is able to be respectful, have boundaries. And then 3 years after they started dating, they got engaged. And now she's been married to this person for 3 years, and now she's starting to try and have a family. It's a wonderful um, example because it's not one that people would have heard about a lot. And I really think it's important for people to know she's definitely not the only person that I've met that has gone from being what people would say a victim to a survivor to a thriver. The most important thing, and again, therapy is not for everybody on this planet, right? But I think the most important thing is being able to find ways to acknowledge and understand what happened to you. So things like going to therapy, journaling, having a voice, having witnesses, having people that you can talk to. And then it's not just about the speaking, but it's also then about learning how to manage all the shame and the guilt and the fear and for many anger. Once we start opening up and breaking our silence, there's a lot of anguish, and for many of us it's devastating when we realize the full impact. So to be able to have multiple support systems, some of them need to be internal. Like one of the things that I talk a lot about is learning how to move into self-love, going from self-destruction to how can I manage my anger and the shame and the fear. So being able to implement things that are about self-care, like being able to make sure we get a good night's sleep, knowing what to do when we're having a flashback, being able to have activities, things like yoga, hiking, for many people, art and music, different types of outlets so that we can continue to soothe and comfort the part of us that's really hurting, but also continue to move through the grieving and the healing process. I really think that that is so important. It really is possible to learn how to live with trauma, no matter how horrible, no matter how long, no matter who hurt us, to know that if we're willing to face it, acknowledge it, and learn how to manage, because PTSD is not something that we can cure. I'm someone that was diagnosed with it in my 20s, and I will always have it. But to know that it doesn't have to stop me from living a full life. It doesn't have to stop us from being parents or having intimate relationships or even going for job increases or being able to have living with the idea that if we want to accomplish something, even if the trauma at times interferes, it doesn't need to stop us. So when I think of the book, I think of the idea of freedom and peace and hope and hopefully a ton of healing for people.